It's a pleasure to be here, Francis, and actually, I'm actually pleased to have this opportunity. So thank you very much. Let me just start by giving you a 2-second introduction of myself. So my name is Saqibah. As a profession, I'm a Chief People Officer for a tech organization, but in my spare time, I'm also the co-chair of Palmers Green Mosque in North London, which you may know of because it's very local. And I'm honoured to be invited to be speaking with you all this evening. So my objective basically is to give everyone some information and tell you about the situation on the ground in Pakistan. Great to see that the topic of climate change has come up in this type of forum. As we know from news and from recent events, it's a topic that we can't afford to ignore. Our future generations are depending on us, literally, to save the planet. And the actions taken by previous generations were perhaps taken without the information and the knowledge that we have today. And therefore, we have a duty now to make the changes to help slow down the effects of climate change. So I'm going to talk to you specifically about the effect of climate change in Pakistan. As you will know, the floods in Pakistan this year have made headline news, and the devastation has been, and it still is, it's just, we stopped seeing it on the TV, but it still is catastrophic. So we know that water generally has the ability to be immensely beautiful, but it also has the ability to be immensely disastrous. I was very fortunate recently to visit a beautiful part of the world where the ocean was as bright and as blue as the sky on a summer's day. Not only was it sparkling blue, it was also super clear. So clear that you could see God's creations in the water. So beautiful fish swimming around in stunning colors, different shapes, sizes, and, their little habitats and sort of, swimming around. So the water there was teeming with life. And, we didn't want to come home. I didn't want to come out of it, wanted to stay and watch the fish. And I wanted to watch that blue water gently cradle the white beaches until the sunset. But obviously, I'm not here to tell you about my holiday experiences. But what I do want to do is to ask you to contrast this crystal clear blue water image full of life with the flood waters that have destroyed parts of Pakistan. Those flood waters in Pakistan are not sparkling blue. Those flood waters are dark, they're daunting, they're dirty, and they're freezing cold. And trust me, no one in their right mind would want to be in that water. That water isn't clear, it's dark, it's almost black, and it certainly isn't teeming with life. It's full of pollution. There's all sorts of debris in it, oil, dirt, building parts, roofs, car parts, trees, you name it, plastics, rubbish. It's just full of filth. And that's not all of it, because that water also contains sewage. And, I'm just going to be blunt and say animal feces, human feces, dead animal parts, dead human parts, and that water, that flood water coming into people's homes, and, it's teeming with death. So I just want everyone just to imagine finding yourself suddenly woken up and being surrounded by it, because this is the reality of what people found themselves in Pakistan. And imagine that you see your belongings and perhaps even your loved ones being carried away from you in it. And imagine knowing deep down that you might not ever see them again. And I pray that God protects us all from any of such tragedy. But I think it's important just to bring to life, the effect of something like that on individuals. It's real tragedy, and it's breaking and broken up families and destroyed families. I think it's important to recognize that we in the Western world, we've become so conditioned by seeing images of tragedies such as these on our TVs and our screens. We forget that these are real people. And these are real people like me and you, and they have real lives that in a matter of seconds are totally destroyed. Back in 1992, I think it was, when there were some floods in Pakistan, I went to Pakistan at that time, and I went after all of the water had subsided. I went actually about 6 months after the water had gone, and I went into the homes, and I will never forget the look on those people's faces. Even 6 months after that water had gone back, there was a sort of water line, just about 6.5, 7 foot on the walls that you could still see. There was just a dampness about the place. And those people that I went and visited, they managed to survive because they managed to grab their children and run upstairs onto the roof. But all of their belongings had gone. They had nothing left apart from the four walls of their house and their children in their arms, and that's it. And they were quite counted as one of the fortunate ones. But that's the reality, and that's the situation right now for our people in Pakistan. So families have been separated. Many have died, many have lost everything, and whole villages in some cases have been swept away. I think the figure is something like 33 million people are now homeless and facing disease and hunger, and they're in distress. And the most affected regions have been Balochistan, Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Gilgit-Baltistan, and the Punjab area, where nearly 1 million homes and around 800,000 cattle have been damaged or destroyed. And if you don't know Pakistan, because these are areas that not many people have heard of, it's not like it's one area in Pakistan. It's like different areas in Pakistan, some in the south, some in the north, and some near the middle. So there's no sort of science around, who and how things have been affected. So infrastructure has been swept away, thousands of kilometers of roads and hundreds of bridges, transportation links and lines of communication and so on. They've all been affected. So those who are trying to flee to safety, their efforts were also being hampered even further. And as I said, the devastation, it really is catastrophic. So people have lost their livelihoods. If they had shops, everything gone, their homes gone. There's high poverty rates anyway in Pakistan. And those who had very little now really have nothing at all. Can you imagine 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater? And it's important, I think, that we just talked about, the cause of all of this, because I think this is your topic, Francis, that you're talking about today. So the cause of all of this is climate change. It's basically global warming. I was reading some stats, and I think it was something like between 1998 and 2018, Pakistan had like 150 extreme weather events. And of course, as we know, this year, there was these big floods that hit the country. The main reasons were increased rain and the glaciers melting because of the rise in the global temperatures. So this rise in global temperatures also means that the deserts are expanding. And there are, extreme heat. There's extreme heat in Pakistan. The droughts are longer, they're hotter, they're drier. I think this year in April and in May, they were the hottest months that the country's had in the last 60 years. So extreme weather events coupled with like heavy monsoon rains, they will continue to cause frequent and intense floods and droughts in that region. Karachi is on the coastline, and Karachi's coastline has risen at a rate of around 1 millimeter per year between 1856 and the year 2000. But between 1993 and 2010, the average rise was around 3.2 millimeters per year. So you can just see that in just a short period of time, there's been a much bigger rise in the sea level. And why? Because of the thermal expansion of our oceans, as well as the melting glaciers caused by the global warming. So these events, and this is really important to remember, these events place immense pressure on an already frail economy. It hasn't got the strongest infrastructure anyway. Yes, there are big cities like Lahore, like Karachi, like Islamabad that actually now are doing very well, and they have got good infrastructure, but it's nothing like what we see here in the UK. And the electrical grid is so weak that there's a thing called load shedding, where they just switch it off for a while. It's become more and more common. And imagine like when there's temperatures that are nearing 50 degrees and there's no ability to use a fan or aircon, you can only imagine what effect that has. So I've been there in the middle of summer, and when the electricity goes and it's the middle of the night, and honestly, you cannot breathe. The only way to describe it is like you're in some sort of a boiling hot cauldron, and there's a fire burning all around you, you just can't breathe. And there's nowhere to go to try and get fresh air because the air is just so hot. And again, it's very difficult for us to try and understand that here in this country. We had temperatures in London of mid-30s this year, and we found that difficult. So imagine when it's 50 degrees. So electricity problems, water shortages, food insecurity, and conflict caused by all of these issues are a serious threat in Pakistan. So my thoughts and my asks are really that as human beings, we need to come together, and we should be taking climate change much more seriously. I know there's the COP meetings and so on that go on, but what we want to see is some practical actions coming out of those global meetings. For me as a Muslim, it's according to our Islamic way of life to look after each other. And look, climate action has been largely a talking point in the West, maybe because countries like Pakistan, which have seen these recent disasters, are dealing with multiple issues and basic human rights, meaning that climate action, it just takes a backseat. It just isn't, important enough when people are starving and hungry and have nowhere to go and nothing to clothe themselves with. Climate action just doesn't become a priority, unfortunately. So we need to place a greater importance on the impact of our actions in the West on the rest of the planet. So I encourage everyone here as well, and our wider communities, to try and reject human greed and look to respect others, and be responsible for our actions. We have a moral obligation towards looking after our planet, looking after each other. And as humans, we must play a part in making sure that our actions don't contribute to climate disasters. So developed countries like here in the UK, we're responsible for the majority of the emissions today. And this contributes to global warming that I talked about earlier, and in turn contributes to the melting glaciers, which had an impact on Pakistan's flooding this year. So we all need to act much more sustainably in order to preserve our planet that we've been gifted, and we must try and find a way to help our poorer countries to deal with the situations that they find themselves in today.